Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today. As always, to kind of sit down here in the dojo and just kind of equip ourselves to be able to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And got a very interesting show for you today. We have Tim Drake coming on the show. Tim, you may remember from a book that he's written a few years ago. He was actually the editor of the book. It's called There We Stood, Here We Stand, 11 Lutherans Rediscover Their Catholic Roots. And so he's going to come on the show. He's going to share his journey of faith from Lutheranism to Catholicism. And, man, I have a bunch of questions for him because, that's... Lutherans are fairly common. I mean, you run into Lutherans lots of times. In fact, I had a dialogue over coffee last night with a former Lutheran. And there's not all Lutherans are the same. There's different confessions. And it'd be fun to kind of pick his brain as to what are the Lutheran distinctives that make Catholicism, attractive as opposed to, say, a Presbyterian or a Baptist, or somebody like that. So, plus I want to hear his story too. So he'll be coming on the other side of the break. That's going to be fun. So we'll have Tim Drake, and also we'll have our critical thinking skills with our Finding the Fallacy segment. Today's Finding the Fallacy is the Courtier's reply. And we also meet an early church father. Today's early church father is Pope St. Celestine I. So lots of great stuff in store for us today. And so I want to give my shout-outs to all those watching live on social media in the social media section of the dojo. Hello, everybody. Welcome aboard. And I also want to welcome all of you listening on radio around the United States and also around the world via podcast. Great to have you on board. And, in fact, if I could ask you a favor, I've asked this before, but if you are on YouTube, by the way, we have a Hands-On Apologetics channel. And it'd be great if you could subscribe if you're interested. Or, give a thumbs up or whatever you do on YouTube. Because, quite frankly, when it comes to social media, I am really behind the curve on it. But I appreciate it because, that's just how the things work today. It's all by numbers and statistics and things like that. So if you happen to subscribe, please subscribe. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions for Tim, perhaps you're a Lutheran thinking of coming into the church, or maybe you're a convert from Lutheranism, or maybe you're talking to someone sharing the faith with a Lutheran right now, he would be the man to talk to. Give us a call after the first break at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. Or you can always send your emails to questions@handsonapologetics.com. And that is our official virtual mailbox, the virtual dojo mailbox. And so there's always room. There's plenty of gigabytes for mail. Although, it is filling up. And I always get worried when it fills up too much because I'm afraid it's just going to get lost in my inbox. And I want to make sure that I address, especially the older ones that have been waiting for a while. So if you've emailed me, I did reply. But if you're waiting for the question to come up on the air, I'm sorry, but thank you so much for your patience. Eventually, we will get to it. Eventually. I say that every episode, but I truly mean it, though. It's just that we got so many great guests that sometimes it's hard to squeeze in a program where it's just simply me answering questions on email. And I personally think I'd rather hear other people give answers to myself, but that's just me. Anyway, let's see. Well, we jump to our finding of the fallacy today. Our finding of the fallacy is the Courtier's reply. The Courtier's reply is a type of informal fallacy coined by American biologist P.Z. Myers, in which a respondent to criticism claims that the critics lack sufficient knowledge, credentials, or training to pose any sort of criticism whatsoever. So it's a fairly newly coined fallacy. And with newly coined fallacies, they're usually not very well defined. You can actually find a few different definitions of the same one. Where the oldies but goodies that extend back into Roman times, they have the Latin name, those are pretty much etched in stone. But the new ones, they're a little bit loose. So I also found another definition, which is similar, that the Courtier's reply is when they say the uninformed and wrong, that somebody's uninformed and wrong, but they won't say why. This fallacy accuses the opponents of misrepresentation without explaining what they think was distorted, and the Courtier's reply is a red herring in that case, since it draws attention away from what the other side actually said and tries to discuss about how little somebody knows as opposed to what they should know. So, yeah, you can kind of see both in play. I think the first definition, the stricter one, it's a bit more rare. It's rare that you find somebody who will dismiss another person simply because they aren't properly credentialed. They don't have sufficient knowledge. This happens from time to time. It's not very common. And, the retort you use to diffuse that situation is, if my criticism is simplistic, then it should be very easy for someone as well credentialed as you to point out my error, right? So just saying you don't know enough, you don't have letters after your name, that's not sufficient to overturn an objection, right? So as for the other one, that they'll say you're uninformed, but they won't say why, or that you're misrepresenting something, but they don't explain what you're misrepresenting and why. I think that's a little bit more common. You do run into that from time to time. It's funny on the web, they give all sorts of examples, but some of the examples, I think, aren't very good. but nevertheless, just be aware of that. If someone gives you an objection, don't fall into the Courtier's fallacy. If they misrepresent something in the Catholic faith, correct them. Show them what they're misrepresenting or what they're distorting. And don't just say, well, you know what, you really need to know the faith before you can say anything about it. Because, that doesn't help people. Okay, so why don't we jump to the Meet the Early Church Fathers. Today's early church father is Pope St. Celestine I. Pope St. Celestine I is the founder of the diplomatic service of the papacy. Pope St. Celestine was born in Campania and served as a deacon under Pope Innocent I. He was elected pope in 422. Celestine confiscated property of the Novatianite churches and restored the Basilica of St. Mary Trevestri, I believe that's how you pronounce it, after it was damaged by Alric's sack of Rome. Although Celestine confirmed the appointment of Nestorius to the see of Constantinople, and remember, Nestorius, of course, is the arch-heretic of the heresy known as Nestorianism, where he proposed that Christ is actually kind of two persons with two natures rather than one divine person with two natures. Although he confirmed the appointment to the see of Constantinople, the Pope opposed Nestorius' teaching and actually supported St. Cyril of Alexandria in the conflict between the two patriarchs. Celestine also combated other heresies such as Pelagianism and semi-Pelagianism in southern Gaul, which is modern-day France, and also in England. and he is supposed to have sent the Pelidus to evangelize Ireland in 431. So there is a connection right there. He is the one who began the missionary efforts in Ireland. Celestine died the following year and was buried in a cemetery in Priscilla. And we don't have a lot. We have lots of fragments. We have some letters, some material here and there. Nevertheless, there is some important information. And in fact, I'll give you a couple. One comes from a letter to the legates that he sent to the Council of Ephesus on May 8th, 431, in which he says, quote, "We enjoin upon you the necessary task of guarding the authority of the Apostolic See. And if the instructions handed to you have to mention this, and if you be present in the assembly, if it comes to controversy, it's not yours to join the fight, but to judge their opinions." So here we have a clear recognition that the legates that were sent to the council were indeed speaking on behalf of the authority of the Apostolic See. We also have a letter from Pope Celestine to the bishops in Gaul. Like I said, Gaul is modern-day France. Speaking about St. Augustine, it's actually kind of cool. This is what he says about St. Augustine. He says, "We keep Augustine always in our communion, a man of holy memory because of his life and merits. Nor did ever so much as a rumor sully him with untoward suspicion. We remember him as a man of such great knowledge that even my predecessors before me accounted him amongst the best teachers." And that is our early church father for today, Pope Celestine I. Coming up on the other side of the break, we're going to be chatting with Tim Drake. Stay tuned.
This is Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio. This March, VMPR, in association with the Catholic Resource Center, will be hosting a special conference for the Adoramus Society. Adoramus at the Triduum, a conference on the spirituality of the Triduum liturgies, featuring speakers Father Joseph Fessio, Dr. Anthony Lillis, and Christopher Carstens, addressing such topics as developing a liturgical spirituality, the spirituality of Holy Thursday, the spirituality of Good Friday, and the spirituality of the Paschal Vigil and Easter season. It all takes place March 14, 2020, at the historic Sacred Heart Chapel at 381 West Center Street, Covina, California, 91723. You can register online at vmpr.org or call now at 877-526-2151 to reserve your seat today for Adoramus at the Triduum. Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back to Hands On Apologetics. And, there's a story I heard a while back. I think it might have come from somebody from the Coming Home Network, where they said when Lutherans and Reformed converts get together, many times it ends up in the discussion of, or an argument or a debate about who is closer to Catholicism, Lutherans or Reformed Protestants. And that's a very interesting question, because remember, Martin Luther is the father of the Protestant Reformation. And, what would lead a Lutheran to see the truth about the Catholic Church? What's unique about Lutheranism? And to help us understand that, we have Master Apologist Tim Drake with us. Tim is an award-winning writer and former journalist and radio host with the National Catholic Register / EWTN. He currently serves as New Evangelization Coordinator for the Holdingford area Catholic community in the Diocese of St. Cloud, Minnesota. He resides there with his wife and 5 children in St. Joseph, Minnesota. And you could pick up a great book. This is, I think, a classic that if you don't have it on your shelves, you really need to get a copy. The title is There We Stood, Here We Stand, 11 Lutherans Rediscover Their Catholic Roots. And Tim Drake, welcome to Hands On Apologetics.
Hey, Gary, it's good to be with you. I do have one little correction to make to the intro, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I am no longer with the churches. That's actually a couple of years ago. I am the executive director of a retreat center called Pacem Terrace Hermitage Retreat Center, and that stands for Peace on Earth. We're located in Minnesota, and we offer hermitage retreats for individuals. And so I just wanted you to have that updated information.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was worried about that, so I will update my bio, because I know you're a busy guy. I know that you've been doing a lot. So, okay, absolutely. We'll keep that updated. And, welcome to the show. You've been on my wish list for quite a while.
Well, I'm glad you reached out to me. So.
Yeah, we have a lot of mutual friends. And like I said, your book, There We Stood, Here We Stand, is a really phenomenal book. And one that, I want to keep it in front of the public, because I think it's a great resource to gain some insight as to, how the Catholic Church is viewed through Lutheran eyes.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your background.
So my background, I sometimes laugh a little bit when I talk about being Lutheran in Minnesota, and I say that it's required for citizenship in the state. Because there are so many Lutherans here. If you look at a map of the distribution of Lutherans, you'd find that Minnesota and California tend to be the states that have the most Lutherans. But I grew up in Minnesota and was, I guess, part of a family you would say was sort of a lukewarm Lutheran family. What I mean by that is we would go to church on Sundays kind of when we felt like it. And that was kind of dictated by my parents and their practice of their faith. But as I moved into confirmation in the Lutheran Church, and then was involved in Lutheran campus ministry at the University of Minnesota Morris, I really saw myself as a Lutheran with a fairly strong devotion, and I would say that I came to Christ through confirmation, and that would be sort of the first time, I think, in my life where I recognized that I had a relationship with Christ, and that was important to me, and that would remain with me throughout my life. And what's interesting is that, and I often tell folks, they act surprised when they hear this, but the Lutheran churches that I attended up through college actually had a kneeler, and when we went up for communion, we would kneel at that communion rail and receive communion. So for me, as a Lutheran, I felt that I was receiving Christ. And, of course, and we can get into all of that later, it's not surprising then perhaps that the Catholic Church's teaching and the belief in the Eucharist really was what drew me into the church and helped me to really fall in love with Christ and His church.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when did you? First, how did you view Catholicism while you were a Lutheran?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that we viewed Catholicism with some maybe skepticism might be a good word to be used. It's interesting because I wouldn't say that my family or my parents were particularly anti-Catholic, but there certainly was this undercurrent of kind of anti-things Catholic. You know, they never came right out and and said something, you know, to make me go, oh, you know, they have something against Catholics. And I had in my own family, my grandfather, who I did not know, he had been Catholic at one point in his life, but had divorced and remarried, and that, I think, largely his experience of that led him to leave Catholicism. And so I had actually a couple of uncles who were also Catholic. My mother and her younger brother were raised Lutheran. And so it made for some interesting dynamics because at times, of course, like if a cousin were getting married or something, you know, we would have these few occasions where we would go to the Catholic Church. And you know, the same sort of questions that most Protestants would raise would, you know, I had, you know, things like, why is there all this up and down? Why are we kneeling now? What do these statues represent? And do Catholics worship these individuals, or what's going on here? You know, a lot of those misconceptions, I would say that many Protestants have. I shared those. Yeah. And so for me, looking at the church from the outside, I would say there were a lot of questions and a lot of misconceptions. And those probably for me started breaking down a bit when I met my girlfriend, now wife, Mary, who came from a Catholic family. And so then I could start to see Catholicism in practice and see it lived out and see her family and how her parents prayed and just sort of see a living example, really, of Catholicism.
Yeah.
That certainly, there was some attraction to me there.
Yeah, so in a sense, you kind of got a chance to peek, you know, into, well, how do Catholics live? And you had a great example of the Catholic faith being lived out with your girlfriend/wife and her family.
Yeah, but I would say I had a lot of those, you know, just not understanding confession. What's that about? Why can't I just, you know, why can't I just be on my own and sort of confess those things to God? Or what really is the role of Mary? You know, if I were to walk into a Catholic church and see people kneeling before the Mary altar, you know, in my Lutheran mind, I think there's part of me that would have been, oh my word, what are they doing there? Are they worshiping Mary? I mean, it just a lot of it just came from lack of knowledge, lack of information, you know.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and usually, you know, you suspect the worst. If you see someone kneeling in prayer and there's a statue there, you suspect, you know, oh, boy, they're probably worshiping the statue because we don't do that in our church, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so you got a chance to actually see Catholicism lived out. And was there like a intellectual turning point, something that
there was, yeah,
kind of changed, flipped your worldview, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say that happened. So my wife and I were married right after we graduated from college, and I want to say, it's helpful, I think, to know that I remained Lutheran. Let's see, we were married in 1989, and I came into the church in 1995. So we tried to do the kind of dual faith thing. So what that meant is on a Sunday morning, we would often go to both the Catholic Mass and to a Lutheran service. And there were some things that were fascinating to me about that because the readings were usually identical. So the Psalm and the Old Testament and the New Testament reading, or the Gospel reading, were usually identical. But the one thing that was different was that every time I attended Mass, you had the liturgy of the Eucharist. And was not true of the Lutheran churches I was attending. Many Lutheran churches either had communion, say, on the first Sunday of the month, or they might have it only at the early service. So it was kind of, depending on where you went, sometimes you weren't receiving communion. And so that did make me wonder, why is there this difference? But sort of the intellectual turning point for me was in the, I'm going to say it was in the early 90s, the Lutheran Church came out with a document on sexuality. And in that document, they stated that abortion was a unfortunate but sometimes necessary circumstance for some women. Now, I had a real difficulty with this because of the nature of my conception. My father had wanted me aborted. And so I just really, I think for the first time as a Lutheran, I recognized that being Lutheran meant more than just sitting in the pew every Sunday. It meant that I needed to believe everything that the Lutheran Church taught and believed. And I found myself not believing what they had said, because to me, to go along with that statement about abortion, I couldn't logically do it. It felt like I would be going against my own existence. And so that I often describe as kind of the first crack in my Lutheran shell. And that's when I started really sort of thinking more about faith and why it mattered which church, I belonged to and worshiped at and was active in. And, and for a time there, I think I played around with the idea of going to the Episcopal faith because it seemed like maybe it was a safe step or something.
Yeah, right.
But eventually, after walking home from the Catholic Mass one morning, I told my wife, I think I want to sign up for RCIA and learn more about the Catholic faith.
Wow.
So that was kind of the first turning point, I might say, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hear the music coming up. It's time for a break. We are chatting with Tim Drake about his conversion from Lutheranism to Catholicism. More to come on the other side of the break, folks. Stay tuned.
We finally did it. We have a Catholic Mental Health Conference on April 25th, 2020, here at the Sacred Heart Chapel with Dr. Louis Sandoval. He's going to be speaking on the basics of mental illness versus what we consider normal. Number one, he's going to go on the basics of mental illness versus what we consider normal. Second hour, depression, anxiety versus oppression and obsession. The third hour, bipolar disorders. Oh my gosh, infestation and possession. He's going to talk on mental health with the spiritual aspect. Number 4 talk will be on drug use, altered mental status versus demonic influence. I want to hear that talk. I hope you do too. Go to virginmostpowerfulradio.org or call us at 877-526-2151. The date is April 25th, 2020. Be there by calling 877-526-2151. God bless you. This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio, and it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show, and they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Tim Drake about his journey of faith. And Tim, you were just mentioning before the break how the Lutheran Church changed its position on abortion, and that caused you to reevaluate whether or not you can assent to everything that they teach. And you made your decision to go to RCIA. And, helping out at my church with RCIA, I can't wait to hear this part of the story. What was your impression when you went to RCIA?
Well, I'll be brutally honest. It was not what I expected and not extremely helpful. It was not. I would say that the reason for that was maybe mostly fell on the shoulders of the director, and you have to understand now that at this time we're talking the mid-90s. So I don't know what sort of curriculum was available and what was out there. It seems to me there's a lot of other resources that are available now. But it basically consisted of this. I would show up every week. My wife would go with me because she was my sponsor, and the director would say, so what questions do you have? And then it would usually devolve into this freewheeling conversation where those who were there would kind of share opinions and thoughts. And I remember one particular evening coming home, walking home, because we lived fairly close to the church. And the discussion that evening had drifted to some folks talking about the fact that there was a cinnamon roll or cinnamon bun which had was in the shape of the face of Mother Teresa. And I walked home that night, and I told my wife, I said, if this is what it means to be Catholic, I don't know that I'm that interested, Yeah. And thankfully, I think either she or I shared that concern with some other friends, and one of them actually said, you know what, there's a nearby parish, and the priest at that parish is teaching the class. It's called the Fundamentals of Catholicism, and this friend offered to go with me to that. And it was, I can't remember how many weeks it was. I want to say it was maybe 10 to 13 weeks. It was kind of lengthy, but it was precisely what I needed. And because what would happen is I would go, the priest would teach on a particular topic, might have been, say, Mary or heaven, hell, whatever. And then after he had taught, then, they opened it up for questions. And it was extremely helpful for me because it provided what I was lacking in my own RCIA experience. So it was kind of a supplement, you might say, to RCIA, and it was very helpful.
Yeah, a lot better than discussing miraculous cinnamon rolls, huh? Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, thanks be to God that you found that resource.
Yeah, and I really owe that to this friend, Jeff, who pointed it out to me and then attended each of those sessions with me. So God puts the right people in your life to carry along the path,
Amen. Yeah. Yeah. So you finished the class. By the way, I'm just curious because Lutherans and Catholics, there's so much overlap that we both share.
Yeah.
Was there any particular topics that was difficult for you as you're going through these classes?
Well, I think the ones I'd mentioned earlier, particularly just the idea of confession, was a little hard for me at first, maybe to grasp, and maybe more out of fear than anything else. Just the idea of here I am in my 20s, and I'm just thinking, okay, I've got to go to a priest and kind of share everything, from my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think
that is scary. Yeah.
I think there was some fear there, really, and I think also just a misunderstanding on the role of Mary and how Catholics see Mary. That idea, that misconception that many of us Protestants hold, which is that Catholics worship her, and of course that's not the case. But so I think those were, I would say, minor hurdles that I had to overcome. And I think I'm probably not too, unusual in that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been my experience with Lutherans. Usually it's confession. That almost invariably comes up.
Yep.
And of course Mary.
I would say maybe authority too, actually. The other would be the other one.
Okay.
Because I think as Lutherans, we are, whether we realize it or not, we're kind of at our core rebels. Because Luther himself rebelled against the Catholic Church and came out victorious. So by extension, we carry some of that within us, where it's like, he fought against the Catholic Church. And so I think there is some of that to overcome. It's sort of this idea that as a Lutheran, we're not going to allow any council or church or leader sort of tell us what we can and can't do. And I think we kind of carry that within us, and so you have to kind of overcome that and recognize that and recognize the problems that leads to in terms of authority, and asking yourself, well, who is the authority? Who is your authority when it comes to Scripture or when it comes to particular teachings? And then embracing the idea that no, we need an authority to guide the church. And those would probably be the big three.
Yeah, that's very insightful, because one of the things Luther's lauded for is, here I stand, I could do no other. It's the individual conscience against, the authority of the church and everything else.
Yeah.
I can imagine that would be a strong underlying motivation, especially for Lutherans, is rugged individuality and freedom of conscience. Yeah, very good. So you finished these classes with a priest, and you jumped in next Easter, I take it, or were there other hurdles to overcome?
So here I'll tell you some things that coincided with this, which the thing I find about conversion stories is that each one is so unique. God works with each individual in a highly individualistic way, and it's unrepeatable because each one of us is unrepeatable, right? So in my own story, there's a couple of other things that happened, and they're crucial things. One is the Catholic Church we were attending started something called Perpetual Eucharistic Adoration. And I didn't, at the time, I didn't understand exactly what that was, but my wife was an hour coordinator, so she had to fill the hour, I think it was the 11 to 12 o'clock hour of each day, 11 p.m., and I didn't know what I was signing up for, but I'm a lazy prayer. I need structure in my prayer life or it doesn't happen. So I signed up for, I believe it was Sunday evening, 11 to 12 p.m., and I started going to that little chapel at St. Columba's Catholic Church in St. Paul, and I'm sure the first few times I probably didn't even kneel. But there was something that happened there in the chapel in prayer where I just came to realize that who it was that I was praying before, that this was Christ. And I don't know, it's sort of like everything clicked. It made sense to me then that these differences between the Lutheran and Catholic Church in terms of when we would attend, and the Lutheran Church didn't have communion, but the Catholic Church every time had the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist. So it was just, I think you might say that my, I don't know, I've never expressed it this way before, but it's almost like my faith caught up with my belief or my practice. Because even as I said earlier, when I would go to the Lutheran Church, I would kneel and receive Jesus, and I felt I was receiving him, Mm-hmm. So that occurred, and then one other thing happened, which is a very long story, but essentially I learned about family I didn't know I had. I had essentially been adopted, and I met a half-brother, and this half-brother, we were meeting for the very first time. We had talked on the phone a couple of times, meeting over dinner, and I told him, I said, I'm considering becoming Catholic. And he looked at me and he said, well, at the age of, I think it was either 19 or 20, he said, I converted from Lutheranism to Catholicism. And so in finding out about this half-brother who I didn't know I had, not only had I gained a brother, but I had gained a fellow convert, and his name was Rich, and it was just a beautiful relationship and someone I could turn to and sort of ask questions of. And all of these things kind of coincided to the point where I was supposed to come in at Easter of 1995, but I went to the priest, Father Paul LaFontaine, and I said to him, I know I'm supposed to wait until Easter, but I said, I believe, and I feel that to hold off is somehow denying Christ. And he said, well, that's fine, let's pick a date. And so I chose March 19th because it's the feast day of St. Joseph. And I just figured he would be a good patron to have as a father and husband. And
absolutely.
So I went to the church, and in that chapel where the Eucharistic Adoration Chapel was received into the church, and was able to accompany my wife for the first time to the table of the Lord.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, I hear the music coming up. We are chatting with Tim Drake, and he's sharing with us his journey from Lutheranism to Catholicism. Great story, and there's a lot more to come on the other side of the break, so don't touch that dial. We'll be right back.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone, and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He was kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle, and he says to me, hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great. And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show on the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Daniel, what a testimony, and I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
Jesus said in Luke 17, "When you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are unprofitable servants. We have only done our duty.'" According to St. John of the Cross, God is pleased with the little deeds we do in secret. He takes more pleasure in these than in a multitude of grand works that we may do out of the desire to be seen by others. May God help us to do the things that please Him, and not just to appear great in the eyes of others.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-on Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Tim Drake about his journey of faith from Lutheranism to Catholicism. And, man, what a remarkable journey of grace for you, Tim. In fact, it really rings true to my own heart, because it was the real presence in the Eucharist that really awoke me, from being a cradle Catholic to being, becoming an apologist. So let's talk a little bit about the Eucharist, shall we? Because Eucharistic adoration is not Lutheran. It's not something Lutherans do.
No.
What do we share? Where do we differ in regards to the Eucharist?
Well, how much time do we have?
I got a little time.
It's interesting because, of course, the Church, we use these terms, which terms can be helpful and sometimes they might not be. But we talk about consubstantiation, transubstantiation. That I think sometimes that confuses folks. And what's interesting is, I'm glad you brought up this point of Eucharistic adoration, because if we as Lutherans and we as Catholics, if we believed the same thing, well then there wouldn't be a difference. There would not continue to be this separation, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was preparing to get married to my wife, inevitably someone would say something like this, the Lutherans and Catholics, they're virtually identical, and yet in practice, as time went on, I thought, well, okay, if they're virtually identical, then why are they apart? Why is there this separation? There has to be a reason for that. Mm-hmm. And the best way for me, in kind of a layman's way to explain the difference, is that as Catholics, and we believe that a change takes place, and so the host, the bread, becomes Christ's body and blood, right? Mm-hmm. And we believe that. But we also believe that because the change takes place, that it remains. And that's why we have a tabernacle, and why if there's any leftover hosts, they're set aside in the tabernacle. And it's also why a consecrated host can be placed in a monstrance, and we as Catholics will get on our knees and pray to Christ in the Eucharist. And that's not something that you would find any Lutheran doing. So do they believe a change takes place? Well, they may believe that the change takes place, but it doesn't remain. So as soon as the service is over, it's almost like it's a function of the service itself. As soon as the service is over, if there's any remaining bread, it might just be wrapped up in a bag and brought back into the sacristy. It's not treated especially. It's not something that a Lutheran would adore. That, I think, explains, at least in my mind, it kind of explains the difference, So the question becomes, does a change take place? And if a change takes place, then what happens afterwards?
Yeah. Yeah, I had a good friend who was Missouri Synod Lutheran, and his first step towards Catholicism was when he asked the minister what he did with the leftover bread of the Eucharist, and the minister said, well, we just throw it out for the birds. And he was so scandalized by that it kind of caused him to reevaluate, do I really believe what they teach?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and that's not even getting into the larger question, which is, does a change take place? Because in the Lutheran Church, of course, one would argue that their ordinations are not valid. It's not in line in succession with the Church historically, and so that's a kind of an even bigger question. But
sure.
But yeah, certainly in practice, communion or the liturgy of the Eucharist. I mean, there's a significant difference there between the Catholic and Lutheran understandings.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I always found that fascinating. And it is hard to kind of, there's lots of subtlety to discussing both views. But so once you came into the church, what was your experience? Was it more like a homecoming, or were you already familiar with the church and it just felt like, now you're where you're supposed to be?
That's a great question. I say that I think Chesterton G.K. Chesterton, didn't he have a saying about the church looking much larger, what was it, on the inside than the outer? But my own experience would be that as a Catholic, there's always something to learn.
Yeah,
I don't think you can ever exhaust it, really. I mean, in a lifetime. Yeah. And that's one thing that I love, like from an intellectual perspective. And I find that my relationship with Christ is always growing because there is so much to learn. We have so many devotions and so many saints that we can turn to. And it's just a very, very rich faith that we have and that we can draw upon. And I also find that it accompanies us in life. So that as a parent, there's particular graces that come, from sacrament of marriage, and those graces are there when you need them. And then when you, just other difficulties, maybe it's a job loss or other things that you go through in life, and the church is always there to support you. And I would say, this date of March 19th when I came into the church, dates are very important to God, and we don't always understand that. But so I chose that date for a very practical reason, because it was St. Joseph is a model father and husband, right?
Right.
But after I came in, so on the day of my conversion, the day I came into the church, my brother Richard, his half-brother, after the ceremony was over and Mass was over, he turned to me and he said, "Do you know the significance of this day?" And I said, "No, I don't." And he said, "Well, it's our biological father's birthday."
Wow.
So we shared a father. His name was Irving, and it was his birthday. And now to go one sort of step further, I mean, I currently live in St. Joseph, Minnesota.
Yeah.
I've had a devotion to St. Joseph my entire life. Well, my brother Rich was very sick. He had MS and several other issues, and he died here 3 years ago. Well, the day that he died was the year that the Feast of St. Joseph was transferred, because it fell on a Sunday. So the Feast of St. Joseph, it would have been in 2017, fell on March 20th, and that is the date that my brother Richard passed away.
Wow.
And so I cannot help but just sort of look at all of that and say, there's the hand of God in all of it.
Yeah.
And it just continues on. As time goes on, it just continues and grows deeper and richer. And I just can't imagine, not being Catholic.
Wow, that's beautiful. So, we have a few more minutes left. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to recently with the Hermitage.
Oh, sure, yeah. So, Pachman Terrace is a Hermitage retreat center. It was started about 32 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's a place where guests can come to experience silence and solitude with God in the beauty of a natural wooded environment and these very small, simple but beautiful hermitages. And so it really fosters the idea of spending alone time with God. It really is an imitation of Christ, who frequently would go out into the desert to be alone with his Heavenly Father. And so we have guests, usually just over 1,000 guests every year who come and stay usually 2 or 3 days. And we're open year-round, and I'm the executive director, so I just am overseeing things here and trying to continue the mission of this place, which is to create an environment where people can come and be alone with God. So I do that, and then in addition I do continue some writing. I just came out with a children's illustrated book called The Attic Saint, which is a beautiful little simple story about a boy who finds a treasure in the attic, and it has an impact on his family, and it's a story of faith. So
beautiful. Who's that published by?
That's published by Emmaus Road Publishing, St. Paul Center for Biblical Theology. Same publisher as Scott Hahn. Yep. I'm good friends with Rob Corzine, who works there. So they're a great publisher. They are.
Excellent. Yeah. So well, that's good. So you're busy writing. You're busy running a Hermitage. God has certainly blessed you with a fruitful ministry. And of course, like I said, that my favorite book is There We Stood, Here We Stand. 11 Lutherans rediscover their Catholic roots. If you could really quickly, we only have maybe a minute. How did you come up with the idea to put those together?
Well, when I was going through my own conversion, I wished I had something like that. I wish there were other Lutherans I could turn to. And so that's how that idea came together. The title, I'm pretty sure Patrick Madrid had a hand in helping me with the title. And so then I just reached out to try to find different folks who had stories to tell, and many of them are former Lutheran pastors. And so asked them to share their stories, and it's surprising how popular that book has continued to be over time.
Yeah, well, I think it was well needed and well done. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Gary.
All right. That's Tim Drake, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I highly recommend the book, especially if you have Lutheran friends or maybe someone who's coming into the church from that faith. It's called There We Stood, Here We Stand, 11 Lutherans Rediscover Their Catholic Roots. Great book. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk with the Terry and Jesse Show. And boy, this hour is just flown. It's time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here, turn down the dojo lights, and I hope everybody has a great day. And God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow in this thing that we call Hands on Apologetics. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.